Again, good afternoon to all of you. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this event. My name is Axel Krein and I'm the Executive Director of Clean Sky. During this joint event today between the Clean Sky Joint Undertaking and the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, we will present to you the results of a jointly commissioned and very recent study on hydrogen-powered aviation. The study was performed by McKinsey, and a lot of European and also worldwide aviation experts and hydrogen experts contributed. For your information, we will make the study available just after this presentation in the afternoon, so you can see that on our website, you can download it. Let me please note as well that the event is recorded, so if you would like to have a look, we will also make sure that you have a chance to see that later on. I'm also very happy to announce that we have today quite a large audience. We have around 1,800 participants registered, so quite a record participation. Let me say a few words about the aviation and the hydrogen context. As you all know, the aviation sector is currently facing an unprecedented crisis following the COVID-19 pandemic. And at the same time, the sector has to accelerate its journey towards climate neutral aviation, allowing for continued mobility, jobs, and growth for the benefit of all European citizens. The result of the study you're going to see in a few minutes will show that novel and very disruptive aircraft innovations in combinations with hydrogen technologies can play a key role in transforming aviation to a climate neutral system in the next decades. And by that, obviously, also complying then with the challenging targets set out by the EU Green Deal. Such disruptive innovation will require significant aircraft research and development efforts, as well as ground infrastructure investments. Additionally, accompanying regulations and certification standards are mandatory to ensure safe, reliable, and economic hydrogen-powered aircraft can take to the skies. We have asked industry experts, and they anticipate that it will take at least 10 to 15 years to bring those radical advancements to life and into commercial service. And consequently, the required research needs to start right now in order to meet the ambitious timescales and targets. This is a key moment in time for aviation and for hydrogen. And let me now please hand over to my colleague, Bart Bibuik from the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. He's going to introduce today's agenda and also our first keynote speaker, Commissioner Vallon. Please, Bart.
Thank you very much, Axel, and also from my side, a very warm welcome to everybody. It's great to have so many people joining today's webinar. Well, this webinar comes really at the right timing, since the European Commission is preparing to announce soon their hydrogen strategy. The cost of renewable hydrogen production came down a lot recently, thanks to cheaper renewable electricity production, but also due to the cost reduction in the hydrogen production technology itself. Same thing in fuel cells, also the fuel cell performance in terms of durability, capacity, and cost made big step forwards. The hydrogen and fuel cell sector is ready to work hand in hand with the aviation industry to design, to test, and to produce the required components and make zero-emission aviation an everyday reality. The agenda of today is first to hear a keynote speech from EU Commissioner for Transport, Mrs. Vallon. Then McKinsey will present the study results, followed with a high-level panel discussion and Q&A session. Finally, the EU Commissioner for Research, Mrs. Gabriel, wanted to make also a keynote to close this event, but unfortunately her plane was rescheduled and could not attend. Actually, she's in the air right now. So she will be replaced by the Deputy Director General of RTD, Mr. Patrick Child. So without further ado, I will give the word to EU Commissioner Vallon. We are so grateful to have you here. The floor is yours. And I hope that we can now switch to the Commissioner. So I see that we still have some delays, so some connection issues. So I propose then that we start first with the presentation. I give the word now to Martin Linde from McKinsey so that he can start with the presentation. And as soon as the connection with the commissioner is established, I think we could make an interruption and let her make her welcome word. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Axel and Bart. My name is Martin Linde. I'm a senior partner with McKinsey, and I have been working in the hydrogen area since 2009. It's a true honor to be here with you today to present the key results of the study on hydrogen-powered aviation. Over the course of the last 6 months, we worked together with industry, academia, research partners to understand whether hydrogen has potential in aviation. In the next 30 minutes, we will provide an overview of the main findings before we go to the industry panel and the Q&A. Please use the chat function in the WebEx to submit your questions. You can already do that now during the presentation, and we will organize the questions accordingly. Before we jump on to the content, let me briefly introduce my colleagues and core team members that are present today. Markus Wildhaler, who co-leads the hydrogen work with Bernd Heid and myself. Moritz Wardenberg, our expert in upstream decarbonization and hydrogen production infrastructure. Daniel Riefer, our expert for aerospace and the aviation industry and a former pilot. And Julian Hölzel, our project manager. If any question will not get answered during today's session, please feel free to reach out anytime. You see my contact details on this page. Now get on to the report. Decarbonization is a major challenge for aviation. Today, the aviation sector emits more than 900 million tons of CO2 per year, about 2.5 to 3% of man-made CO2. Currently, the industry is not growing due to COVID-19, but after the virus, we see growth returning. If it were to continue to grow at 4% per annum, CO2 emissions would more than triple until 2050. This is illustrated by the top line on the chart. At the same time, aircraft are getting more and more efficient. In the last decade, the industry achieved efficiency improvement of 1.5% every year. For the next decades, the International Civil Aviation Organization has set the target to accelerate these improvements to 2% per annum. If this is achieved, emissions would not triple, but still more than double by 2050. This development is shown as the second line on this chart. That means efficiency improvements are not enough to reach decarbonization targets. For example, the Air Transport Action Group has committed to 50% CO2 emission reduction compared to 2005. And the Green New Deal of the European Commission set net zero carbon target as a target for its member states and across sectors by 2050. To achieve these ambitious targets, new technologies are required. One option is to replace kerosene with sustainable aviation fuels, either advanced biofuel or synfuel. Advanced biofuels are made from feedstock that absorbed carbon throughout its life cycle. For example, plants or agricultural residues. Synfuels are produced from hydrogen and CO2. The other option is to switch the propulsion system itself. This means replacing the kerosene turbines with turbines driven by electricity or turbines that combust hydrogen. The aim of the study was to investigate this latter option, the use of hydrogen to propel the airplanes of the future. In the course of this project, we evaluated whether hydrogen has potential, what technology developments are necessary, at what cost it could be realized, and what challenges need to be overcome. The objective of the study was neither to give predictions nor to provide an in-depth technical feasibility study. The purpose was to understand whether hydrogen has potential and therefore whether serious research and development effort should be devoted towards its development. We performed the analysis on 2 levels, the aircraft design and the infrastructure requirement. The focus was on hydrogen propulsion. This includes 3 types of aircraft. Aircraft that react hydrogen in fuel cells and the resulting electricity, then drives the motor and the propeller. Aircraft that burn hydrogen in turbines, and a combination of both, a so-called hybrid hydrogen aircraft. Our findings demonstrate that hydrogen has significant potential to decarbonize aviation alongside other technologies. It is not the only solution, but it is an important part of the solution. We developed this study together with industry, academia, and researchers. The 24 companies and organizations listed here participated. The group includes aircraft manufacturers, component suppliers, airlines, airports, and research institutions. A big thank you for all your valuable contributions. Without you, this report would not have been possible. Let us start with the methodology we applied.
We start by clustering the commercial aviation sector into 5 segments characterized by the amount of passengers transported and the range traveled. So on the left, you can see commuter, regional, short range, medium range, and long range aircraft. Roughly 2/3 of today's CO2 emissions come from flights operated by short and medium range aircraft. So flights with 81 to 250 passengers. These aircraft account for the major stake of the global fleet, about 70%. Less than 5% of emissions are caused by regional and commuter aircraft. The remainder of emissions stem from long-range aircraft. For each of the segments, one concept aircraft powered by hydrogen was designed. For these analyses, we evaluated the climate impact, the technical feasibility, not only for the aircraft design, but also the infrastructure and the economics of such aircraft. In addition to this, we compared hydrogen-powered aviation to aircraft powered by sustainable aviation fuels, focusing on synthetic fuels. Let's turn to our analysis and results on climate impact next. Let us first take a look at how aviation contributes to global warming. On the one hand, there are CO2 emissions, and every ton of fuel burn produces 3.15 tons of CO2. Beyond CO2, there are also other emissions, such as nitrogen oxide, soot, and water vapor, which create contrails and cirrus clouds. These non-CO2 emissions also have a climate effect. To assess the full contribution of aviation to global warming, we need to consider CO2 and non-CO2 emissions. There is still an ongoing scientific debate about how much non-CO2 emissions contribute and the translation into an aggregate measure. In this study, we used the concept of global warming potential measured in tons of CO2 equivalent and looking at a time horizon until year 2100. For conventional aircraft, research shows that the climate impact of all propulsion-related emissions could be 2 to 4 times compared to the effect from CO2 emissions alone. Now, what you see here shown in the different colors is the change how hydrogen and synfuel reduce climate impact of aviation. Starting with the CO2 on the left here, synfuel produces CO2 emissions in flight, but can offset these emissions if CO2 for synfuel production is extracted from direct air. Hydrogen propulsion, in fact, produces 0 CO2 in flight. On NOx and water vapor, emissions of synfuels are similar to kerosene, whereas hydrogen combustion in turbine could reduce NOx emissions by 50 to 80%. Fuel cells do not cause any NOx emissions. For water vapor, hydrogen causes an increase of water vapor, but given the low duration of the water in the atmosphere, this has limited impact on climate. And lastly, contrails and cirrus formation, where you can see that the climate impact with both synfuels and hydrogen could be lower. This is due to lower degrees of substances called aromatics and soot. And with hydrogen, you actually do not have any soot at all. If we combine the described and different climate effects and now ranging these impacts of uncertainties and concluding from this, you can see that synfuels would reduce the climate impact by 30 to 60%, hydrogen combustion by 50 to 75%, and hydrogen in fuel cells reacted by 75 to 90%. So bottom line, hydrogen could significantly reduce climate impact both for CO2 and non-CO2 emissions. As I said, there is still a lot of uncertainties around the effect of non-CO2 emissions. One recommendation from this study is to invest in research to better understand these effects and in order to make better informed decisions. Let us now discuss technical feasibility. The first element of technical feasibility is the aircraft itself and the required technological development. To examine this, we performed simulations with actual aircraft concepts together with the German Aerospace Center. Here you can see an example of a short-range aircraft on the left side. It can transport 165 passengers and fly 2,000 kilometers. We use a classical tube and wing design of an aircraft like an Airbus A320, but we modified it to fit in a tank, a fuel cell, and a hydrogen turbine. To make hydrogen aviation work, we need major technological developments. First, the liquid storage for hydrogen on board of the aircraft. So currently, liquid hydrogen tank systems have an energy density of 6 kilowatt-hours per kilogram. This needs to double for commercial aviation. Second, distribution of liquid hydrogen to and evaporated for the engine and the fuel cell in a reliable and very safe manner. Those systems currently do not exist for aeronautics and have to be developed. Third, we need fuel cell systems for aircraft that are very powerful. A power density of 2 kilowatt per kilogram, including the balance of plant, and an absolute power rating of up to 10 megawatts are needed. The fuel cell system is then feeding an electric motor and creating thrust. And lastly, we need turbines that can combust hydrogen while limiting NOx emissions. As said, these are quite ambitious developments. But based on our expert interviews and projections, they can be achieved. But it requires that we put significant efforts behind this development. More on that you will see in the research roadmap we discuss later. The resulting aircraft design shows that to fit in the liquid hydrogen tanks in the back of the fuselage of this aircraft, the aircraft fuselage itself has to be extended. So the A320 that you can see here would now be nearly as long as an Airbus A321. This simulation for the short-range segment shows that a hybrid propulsion system results in the most energy-efficient economic hydrogen flight. This combines a fuel cell system powering the aircraft in cruise flight and a hydrogen turbine supporting for takeoff, climb, and landing. We conclude, and you can see it here on the right, that compared to a kerosene-powered reference aircraft in 2035 and assuming the required technology improvements in the next 10-15 years, the energy demand can be reduced by 5% and the climate impact by 75% with no CO2 emissions in flight. From the start of the development, and given that some significant development will need to happen, we foresee an entry into service 15 years from now for this particular aircraft. So hydrogen propulsion not only has an effect on aircraft design, but also on the airport and fuel infrastructure, which we will discuss next.
One of the key enablers to make hydrogen-powered aviation feasible is the availability of appropriate infrastructure. To test this, we built a scenario for deployment. We then tested whether there are roadblocks for building the infrastructure for this envisioned deployment. We actually differentiated between two horizons, until 2040 and the decade afterwards. You can find the earlier horizon on the left-hand side of the slide you're looking at. In this earlier horizon, until 2040, there are only commuter to short-range aircraft that could possibly fly on hydrogen, given the earlier conceivable entry into service dates of these planes. For illustration purposes, let us assume that 15% of the global fleet is replaced with hydrogen-powered aviation or aircraft by this time. In these early years, we foresee no insurmountable technical roadblocks to enable hydrogen-powered aviation. Hydrogen demand from aviation would comprise roughly 5% of total global hydrogen demand. This demand could thus be served by the prevailing hydrogen supply industry. There would only be need for limited infrastructure updates beyond that at airports, given the smaller share of hydrogen flights and low amount of fuel needed. For example, liquefaction could happen off-site, and aircraft refueling could happen via liquid hydrogen refueling trucks, a technology that is already available today. Refueling times could become longer as volumetric density of liquid hydrogen is lower than kerosene's. However, we believe that the aircraft turnaround times don't need to be extended for these shorter range flights. Of course, new safety procedures need to be introduced and well researched. The largest challenge in this time frame is actually likely to be the synchronization and coordination efforts between all the industry players involved, from providers of infrastructure to airports to airport manufacturers. In the decade afterwards, on the right-hand side of the slide, skill challenges are more significant, as our scenario assumes hydrogen-powered medium-range aircraft come into service. There will also be growing global hydrogen fleet of up to 40% of all operating aircraft by then. As you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, to support this, hydrogen demand from aviation would need to increase would increase fourfold, comprising 10% of global hydrogen demand. Given the much larger volumes involved, airports may start to need to be supplied with transmission pipelines. That also implies different aircraft or airport refueling infrastructure. On-site liquefaction will be necessary if pipelines are used to supply airports. At-scale refueling system will need to be developed as well. For example, autonomous refueling trucks, refueling platforms, or even refueling lots away from the gate. Gate sizes may need to be adjusted to accommodate the greater length of liquid hydrogen aircraft, as my colleague was just referring to. Finally, due to the lower flow rate, refueling times may significantly increase, exceeding the planned turnaround times for medium to long-range aircraft. As you see, we were not able to identify any hard barrier, but these challenges are, of course, significant, in particular in terms of the scale of the fuel supply. Let us turn to the cost implications next. On this slide, we examine the cost of using hydrogen aircraft through total cost of ownership. That is, the total cost of purchasing and operating an aircraft over its useful life. Importantly, we are comparing the cost assuming that all aircraft are manufactured and used at scale. Hydrogen propulsion affects the total cost of ownership of an aircraft through different fuel costs, also through CapEx and additional maintenance costs, and then there's other costs like indirectly via infrastructure. Let us examine the case of a short-range aircraft first, as an example. In 2040, our analysis show that a hydrogen aircraft would increase total cost of ownership by 25% for a sample flight of 2,000 kilometers. To illustrate that, that would be equivalent to about 18 euros additional cost per passenger. In the graph on the slide, you see a comparison of the cost per available seat kilometer. On the left-hand side, you see the total cost for a kerosene airplane today, being about 3.3 cents per kilometer. For our hydrogen aircraft, this increases by 25% to 4.1, farther on the right-hand side of the slide. 9% of this increase comes from hydrogen production, liquefaction, and the whole infrastructure behind supplying the fuel. Aircraft cost at another 11%, divided by 5% for the additional CapEx and 6% for the additional maintenance. The biggest part of this is due to the longer airframe that my colleague referred to accommodate the hydrogen tank and the sub-zero fuel system. Finally, another 5% comes from the lower availability due to refueling, which takes longer with hydrogen than with kerosene. Despite these increased costs, hydrogen flights would still be 7% less expensive than flying with syn fuels, with CO2 from direct air capture at scale, as you can see all the way on the right-hand side of the slide. These figures underline the potential competitiveness of hydrogen aviation. Given larger scale-up and learning rates in producing hydrogen aircraft and fuel, these costs are projected to decrease even further in the years afterwards. As a next step, let me show you the economics of other hydrogen aircraft segments we looked at. This slide shows the projected entry into service cost per available seat kilometer versus kerosene and syn fuel, and abatement cost of each of the segments we looked at. Looking purely at cost, the economic analysis shows that hydrogen propulsion could be less or equally expensive than syn fuel powered aviation for all aircraft segments up to medium range in 2040 already. Only for the long range aircraft, where the aircraft is significantly larger and less fuel efficient, syn fuel would be a more competitive option. This comparison only shows the pure economics behind this, but it is important to evaluate and connect these costs to the climate impact reduction as well, since after all, that's what we're after. These so-called abatement costs can be seen all the way on the right-hand side of the slide. It shows how much it costs to abate a ton of CO2 equivalent emissions with H2 or with hydrogen and with syn fuel propulsion. Despite the range of uncertainties behind the reduction potentials, a clear ranking order can be observed. For commuter to short range aircraft, it could be more competitive to reduce their climate impact with hydrogen propulsion than with syn fuels from direct air capture. For medium range, as you can see, hydrogen would still be or could still likely be more competitive, but syn fuels are on the upper end of the uncertainty range. Syn fuels would be more economic to abate the climate impact of long-range aircraft, as you can also see. In the next step, we tested the potential abatement of climate impact in the scenario of hydrogen aviation deployment by 20.
So to estimate the impact of hydrogen in aviation could be, we developed a scenario in which the aviation sector is fully decarbonized. The scenario assumes that the technology gets developed and commercialized as described before. This results in a picture in which hydrogen and sustainable aviation fuels, including syn fuels, are complementary and jointly cover all aircraft segments from commuters to long range, indicated by the green and blue areas in the diagram. In this scenario, hydrogen-powered aircraft initially replaced conventional aircraft in the commuter to short-range segment and half of the medium-range segment. So how does that work in detail? Commuter, regional, and short-range hydrogen aircraft would start to come into service between 2030 and 2035. New aircraft after these years are assumed to be hydrogen-powered. Medium-range hydrogen aircraft start to become available after 2040. In this segment, 50% of new aircraft are hydrogen-powered and 50% are supplied by synthetic fuel. We do not foresee hydrogen propulsion for the long-range segment until 2050. For this segment, syn fuel is the more feasible and cost-optimal solution. All aircraft that are not replaced with hydrogen aircraft are powered by sustainable aviation fuel. So in such a scenario, 40% of the global fleet would be hydrogen powered by 2050. We achieve the net zero target for aviation, reducing CO2 emissions by about 1.8 gigatons compared to a baseline that only considers efficiency improvements. In addition to CO2 emissions, the scenario foresees a mitigation of non-CO2 emissions in the amount of 0.8 gigatons of CO2 equivalents. So the presented scenario illustrates that hydrogen could play an important role in decarbonizing the industry. However, to get there, we have to invest in research and innovation to achieve the projected entry into service dates and reduce costs. So in order to get where we want to be in 2050, we identified key enablers for hydrogen-powered aviation. This research and innovation roadmap is structured in 3 time horizons, the columns that you can see on the chart, and 4 areas of key enablers. We foresee 3 major milestones. In 2028, we aim for a proof of technical feasibility and first certification rules of a commercially available hydrogen aircraft, and a first demonstrator short-range aircraft as a requirement for potential entry into service by 2035. In the second horizon, from 2028 to 35, and building on these designs, we envision a medium-range aircraft demonstrator for a potential entry into service by 2040. By then, a safe and efficient refueling setup for airports should also be available. Lastly, until 2050, further assessment on hydrogen as an energy source for long-range aircraft is required, such as the development of a revolutionary demonstrator concept. In parallel, innovation should focus on developing a large-scale refueling infrastructure, with at-scale solutions for insulated airport pipeline refueling systems, so-called hydrant refueling systems. In our report, these milestones are detailed in 4 work areas. Firstly, components, the integration into aircraft systems, infrastructure, and a supporting regulatory framework. You can find more details on the research and innovation priorities in our report. So in order to achieve net zero, R&I investment needs to happen already today. It will require a significant budget, and both industry and regulators need to work together to remove roadblocks on the way ahead. So all in all, our study shows that hydrogen propulsion has significant potential as one major option for decarbonization, alongside other technologies, such as sustainable aviation fuel. There are 4 main takeaways that summarize our findings. Firstly, hydrogen can become a compelling option, mostly because of its efficiency and climate performance. Serious technology development is required in fuel cells, storage, and liquid hydrogen systems, but the technology challenges seem manageable. Action is required now. To meet the 2050 net zero target, research and innovation need a major boost. A short-range demonstrator airplane is required by 2028, with subsequent development as presented before. Economics are feasible. The per-passenger price premium for traveling on a hydrogen-powered short-range flight could be about 18 euros. For segments up to short-range flying, this could be less than the price premium resulting from synfuels. Climate impact can be significantly reduced. A hydrogen airplane has 0 CO2. Its total climate impact, also counting non-CO2 effects, is up to 70% lower than a kerosene aircraft. This makes it the lowest emission option for commercial flights. So this concludes our short presentation of study results, and I hand back to the colleagues to take us through the further program.
Excellent, thank you, Daniel. And I believe we now have the Commissioner Vălean also on the line. We'll try to unmute her now. Commissioner Vălean, can you hear us?
Yes, hello.
Excellent.
I deplore the fact that I couldn't connect video. Apparently my team here tried to do that, but with all the logistics here in the commission, in the office, layers and layers of security, apparently we couldn't connect to your call. But nevertheless, it's a pleasure for me to be part of your debate today. The presentation was really, really interesting. And if you will allow me, I would give you a couple of my thoughts with the view of what we are supposed to work on, meaning the decarbonization of the aviation. I do believe that it's also a right time for us to step up the work to reduce the emissions in aviation, and it's potentially with the help of hydrogen. We are about to launch a European hydrogen strategy from the research and innovation side. We are proposing a new joint undertaking for clean aviation under Horizon Europe. I know you'll have later Commissioner Gabriel also. And we are preparing our comprehensive strategy for sustainable and smart mobility for later this year. Well, this virus crisis brought a standstill to the economy and lives in general, but allowed us also to slow down and think about the future of transport, including aviation. Sustainability was a priority before the crisis, and that objective hasn't changed. The European Green Deal commits us to reducing all transport emissions by 90% by 2050, and all transport modes must play their part, including aviation. Of course, we are looking at a basket of measures which will help us reach this goal, such as the renewal of fleet with new planes emitting already 20% CO2 less than the previous generation, then the implementation of a more efficient air traffic management system with a single European sky reform, and at international level, CORSIA. Last but not least, sustainable fuels for aviation produced from renewable sources have the potential to reduce emissions by as much as 80% compared to conventional fossil fuels. Today, this potential is completely untapped. As we begin to restore the services right now in aviation, it is the right time to think about turning this around while also considering how it can help us make aviation both more resilient and sustainable. As you know, the aviation relies on energy-dense fuels. It's not easy to decarbonize aviation on account of this energy density requirements that make electrification difficult, as well as strict standards. Hydrogen-powered fuel cells may constitute an interesting option for aviation, but still require considerable long-term research. Also, on the supply side, challenges include scaling up industrial production of clean hydrogen to the required volume, plus high costs and market and supply chain uncertainties. Then we need a new type of aircraft design that integrates hydrogen-based jet engines. I'm looking forward to hear from all the CTOs you have in the call today. We need to look at new intrinsically different safety problems compared to traditional aircraft powered by fossil fuels. I would also like to see how, using a circular economy approach, we can integrate end-of-life aircraft decommissioning into the process, hand in hand with the fleet renewal. It is clear then that we need considerable long-term research and innovation, as well as commitment to solve all these challenges which are so multidimensional. This is why we need a firm action plan for the decarbonization of aviation to cover 2020-2050 in order to achieve synergy, coherence, and a consistent and complementary approach in the EU and among stakeholders. Any such plan must start with the identification of all the challenges, then deploy the large-scale efforts required to find solutions, and present realistic roadmaps based on attainable timescales. We are approaching this challenge from various angles. Decarbonizing aviation cannot be achieved with a silver bullet, and so it makes sense to have a basket of measures, as I mentioned already. We are planning to have the Refuel EU Aviation Initiative till this year. We will assess the best policy options to boost production and market uptake of sustainable aviation fuels. The idea is to provide a long-term and reliable policy framework to trigger significant supply and demand. As I mentioned also, we are currently finalizing a hydrogen strategy, which we expect to see adopted in July. The idea is to scale up the production and use of clean hydrogen in the EU based on a whole value chain approach and positioning hydrogen as a strategic and competitive resource at the center of the European Green Deal objectives. On parallel, we are launching a European Clean Hydrogen Alliance to accelerate decarbonization of European industry at large and to ensure we maintain global industrial leadership. We are also proposing a joint undertaking for clean aviation under Horizon Europe. This will follow in the steps of current Clean Sky 2 joint undertaking. And I'm happy that its executive director Mr. Krein is with us to share his views on the prospects for hydrogen-powered solutions. I'm pleased to see that hydrogen-powered aircraft is one of the key technological strands proposed by the industry for the new joint undertaking. I can assure you that we are following with interest industry's open discussion on a strategic research and innovation agenda supported by the Clean Sky 2 joint undertaking. Well, the road ahead will certainly be both interesting and challenging, and I look forward to see what hydrogen will be able to bring to the sector. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I really appreciate the contribution you are bringing with this discussion, and I'm looking forward to hear further from you, apart from the study, from the CTOs and other people who are with their hands-on on this kind of project, to hear what is feasible and how they see the future. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you so much, European Commissioner Verheyen, for this very inspiring speech and your amazing support to realize the zero-emission aviation. I'm sure I'm talking here for everybody, but you can count on our support to make it happen and to contribute to the Green Deal and also the various new policies that you just announced. So thanks again, and looking forward to cooperate with you more intensively. Now I hand over back to Martin Linder from McKinsey, and he will start now with the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bart. And I see already quite some questions coming in from the audience. Just as a reminder, the chat function will remain open, and we will try to structure and answer all your questions in the Q&A session later on. Let us now move to the panel discussion with leading representatives from the relevant industries. I'm delighted and honored to be joined on our virtual stage by Stefan Köy, Chief Technology Officer, Safran, Glenn Levine, Vice President, Zero Emission Strategy with Airbus, David Burns, Vice President, Clean Hydrogen, the Linde Group, Peer Ekdumme, Executive Vice President, PowerCell, and Rolf Henke, Member of the Executive Board, DLR, Deutsches Zentrum für Luft- und Raumfahrt. Dear gentlemen, welcome and many thanks for joining me. The panel aims at giving floor to leading players, shaping the ecosystem of aviation, hydrogen, and also alternative technology. I would be excited to get your view on the potential of hydrogen to decarbonize aviation of the future and your broader vision for the transition to new technologies and fuels. Before we get into the discussion, it would be great to start with a short opening statement by each of you. May I ask you, Stefan, to kick us off?
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So just to say that H2 will have a role to play definitely in the decarbonization of aviation. And there are two options for it to play a role, and that could be both options in parallel. It's using it to produce e-fuels or what you call syn fuels. And they will be needed for the existing fleet and also for all longer range aircraft. As you could show in the study, we don't envision LH2 powered aircraft for those categories, or liquid hydrogen as a fuel in itself, which has a lot of merit, especially very low CO2 emissions. So and potentially availability for other industries, so supply chain. But there are many difficulties to overcome to get there. It's the beginning of the journey. And I can comment later on those difficulties, which are for some of them specific to aviation. We will use cryo hydrogen. It's the only option. We will burn it for larger aircraft in gas turbines, which is very different from what we do on the ground. And we have to demonstrate the safety level we are accustomed to. And we have to accommodate logistics. So these are the key challenges. We need also to understand the climate impact of H2 compared to other options.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Glenn, would you go next?
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. A pleasure to be here with you all. Airbus has recently restated its ambition to bring a zero-emission aircraft to the market in the 2030 to 2035 timeframe. This is something for which we are definitely investigating hydrogen. We see it as a really strong potential solution to allow us to reduce significantly the climate impact of aviation. What I appreciate in this forum is that we see a number of actors, whether it's airframers like Airbus or engine manufacturers, or even those involved in new hydrogen technology solutions, plus the supply of hydrogen in the wider energy ecosystem. At Airbus, we believe that it's really necessary to be involved in this wider grouping to make this initiative successful. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Glenn. David, would you go next?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Good to be part of the panel. I'm with Linda, and we're the largest industrial gas and engineering company today. Already, a lot of experience with conventional hydrogen, covering the whole value chain from production through liquefaction, distribution, and applications, etc. And we're looking to be a leader in clean hydrogen going forward. We're looking. We have world-class liquefaction technology through Cryotechnique, which is part of Linde Engineering. So we're looking to use that, to scale up for the quantities required here for as highlighted by the study. But we also have, investments in ITM Power, it's a leading PEM electrolysis company. So we're working to try and get both the capital costs for those units down, as well as get the efficiency up, obviously, which will be required for the quantities of hydrogen needed for this sector. So I think we have a lot of know-how, a lot of experience that we're going to bring to bear through R&D and our applications expertise, etc., over the years to make this a success. Obviously, a lot of challenges highlighted in the study, but obviously also a lot of potential as well. So we're excited to be part of this. Thank you.
David, many thanks for your opening comments. Per, may I ask you for your vision from PowerCell? You might need to unmute.
Sorry, I'm mute now, I think.
Yes, we can.
Somebody else did it for me. Somebody else did it for me. Thank you. Yeah. So good afternoon, everybody, and I'm very happy that we have made this study now, and that we were able to come.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. You might want to turn on your camera. It just turned off.
Oh, sorry.
So we can't see you. Now it's working. Thank you.
Okay. Do you see my camera?
No, sorry. It is David. Yeah, if it's not working, we just go ahead with the voiceover, I guess.
Okay, no, it works. So yeah, so good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I'm happy that you made this study here, because I think very interesting topic, and also that we were able to contribute to this. And we at PowerCell, we are developing fuel cells and fuel cell systems, where we're using two different stack platforms, which we use to develop system, which we then adapt to different applications in the power range from a few kilowatt to many megawatts. And today we may be working to application like transportation, stationary, and maritime application. But during the last year, we have recognized a strong and increasing interest to use hydrogen and fuel cells for aviation, due to discussion we have with different players. And we have also made some studies, internal studies for using fuel cell for aviation, where to analyze how our technology fulfill the requirements for this application, also analyze what the value is needed to achieve the requirement in aviation. And we also have today delivered hardware for a company who testing is for aviation applications. So we do really believe that these are very interesting application. All this work has been done bilateral under NDA, so I will not be able to tell much what the conclusion was there. But in general, we have seen a very increasing interest, and we also can see that our technology has a good fit for developing and supply fuel cell stacks for aviation applications.
Yeah, many thanks. Rolf, may I ask you for your opening statement?
Yeah, first let me thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about the research part of this fascinating topic, which may be part of the future of global aviation. So what happened now? Start my video. Here we go again. Next try. Yeah. So DLR is by far the biggest aerospace research organization in Europe, and seem to be the relevant partner to bring forward greening of air transport in general, and in particular to help preparing the introduction of H2 in aviation. We have more than 100 years experience in aeronautics research and more than 40 years in energy research. About a decade ago, we developed and flight tested the world's first aircraft driven by fuel cells. And we tested emission-free ground movements by hydrogen-powered fuel cell on board of our A320 research aircraft Atra. Furthermore, DLR is one of the key research players in the current Clean Sky, including our activities in the technology evaluator, as well in the current FCH joint undertaking. And we are honored that DLR, together with Airbus and KLM, form the chair team of the Advisory Council for Aviation Research and Innovation in Europe, ACARI. So summarizing, together with our partners, DLR is ready to further shape the future of aviation along that hydrogen road, which is somehow an aviation man on the moon mission. And it's the answer to Ursula von der Leyen's Green Deal regarding a sustainable air transport system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rolf, and thank you to the whole group. And I think we already saw some of common sense and already very concrete project that you and your companies are working on. Glenn, may I start with you? You elaborated and mentioned a timeline for when Airbus might have a first hydrogen-propelled airway in the launch. What is the timing from your perspective, and what role could Airbus play in the whole transition area?
So, yeah, good question. I think what I already mentioned is that we're looking at 2030 to 2035 in terms of the time frame for potentially bringing this technology to the market, for bringing a zero-emission aircraft to the market. What that basically means is that we need to be launching a product at the earliest in the 2025 time frame. And in order to launch a product at such a scale, of course, there are all of the technology challenges which need to be mastered. Some of them have already been discussed. We need to assure at least the same level of safety as what we have on our existing platforms. We also need to get to the weight targets, the performance targets of the different technology pieces which pull together an aircraft that uses hydrogen propulsion systems. And this, all of this in the 2020 to 2025 timeframe. Then, and this goes beyond what is perhaps the usual aircraft development program, we also need to be looking at what are the infrastructure and ecosystem changes that are required in order for such an aircraft to be commercially viable. Because what I've been talking about so far is really about making sure it has the correct, let's say, technical performance, the correct safety level, but we also need that it has access at airports to energy at the right cost level. And that means that we need to work with industry, the energy industry. We need to also work in public-private partnerships, it's likely, in order to make sure that we have hydrogen at airports in the 2030s. And we could imagine that happening in a kind of a roadmap where we know that airports are already pushing for the decarbonization of all of their ground transportation infrastructure. What we could imagine is that this phase, 2020 to 2030, of decarbonization of ground transport infrastructure and even ground transportation around airports, so logistics, heavy trucking, buses, etc. This is done via hydrogen in the 2020 to 2030 timeframe, that this is bringing hydrogen familiarization to the airports. It's starting to scale hydrogen, and that then in the 2030s, we start to scale it even more for aviation applications. So this gives you an example of how we need to go outside the usual, let's say, aircraft boundaries and really think about how we develop the ecosystem that's required for an aircraft to be successful.
Many thanks, Glenn, for also giving those very, I would say, concrete timelines and projects. And you mentioned several times the ecosystems or the importance of the ecosystems and the landscape to build up to make those timelines happen. Stefan, maybe to you, Safran produces key systems and propulsion architectures today, and your company has extensive experience in the space sector with respect to liquid hydrogen systems. You mentioned in your incoming statement that there are several technological challenges for commercial aviation. Could you elaborate a bit on those, and could you also a bit define the role that Safran foresees in this area, and also your comments on the timelines that you mentioned?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So just before going into your question, just to recall that Safran is for many types of equipment for the aircraft, which include electrical systems, fuel systems currently for kerosene, and propulsion. So basically, we have a number of skills. We work on fuel cells too, so we have a quite comprehensive view of the energy system. And now coming back to your question, I think we need to distinguish between smaller aircraft, commuters and regional, where the fuel cell could be an option for propulsion, and typically short, medium range, where, as I say, due to weight constraints, we have to go first generation at least, so up to 250 probably, with gas turbines burning hydrogen. And to the question, is it feasible? The answer is yes, because the Russians have already flown in the late 80s a Tupolev flying liquid hydrogen with gas turbines. So there are a number of things to do. The fuel system is going to be very complex because you have to vaporize hydrogen in every conditions of flights, altitude, and failure modes possible to feed the fuel system from the engine with the right conditions. That's a very big difference from what happens on the ground and with fuel cells. And also the problem you have is that you need to, it's not just to be able to fly an aircraft with the system, as the Russian did, but it's to demonstrate the safety level. And so I think we have to adjust the engine to the combustion of hydrogen. That's some work to do, especially to manage the NOx emissions. So we'll have to go to more sophisticated combustion system to overcome that. But the key question is more with the fuel system and how you demonstrate and get acceptance of the safety level of the aircraft in every condition. And we know that we are looking for 10 to the -9 potential catastrophic events, 10 to the -9 per flight hour. So something we are used to with conventional architectures. What do we need to do to convince authorities, airlines, and the public that technology is ready to get to that level of safety? I think it's a key question. And we'll have to think differently about the maturation of the technologies. It's a bit more than just going through what we call the technology readiness ladder, as we're used to do it. But yes, we can take experience from the Ariane rocket engines and rocket system. It's just that the environment, the number of flights, and the safety level we need to demonstrate, it's much higher. So we have we have quite a long journey, I think, of work to get there. That's why we need to get started now.
Stefan, many thanks. Very insightful. David, one question to you. We saw that until 2040, the scale-up of liquid hydrogen infrastructure could be manageable. But afterwards, it would be more challenging. How could this be mastered from Linde's point of view? What is your view on the technical aspects of liquid hydrogen supply at airports, such as liquefaction, step change in refueling speeds, and other challenges that were mentioned?
Good question. Yeah, obviously, while the potential for hydrogen in aviation is encouraging, there are significant challenges ahead, particularly after 2040. But we support the study's proposed approach to start with small commuter aircraft at the smaller regional airports, and then apply those learnings to develop larger and larger aircraft and at larger airports as well. To develop the infrastructure required. So kind of a swift kind of step-by-step approach from today through 2040 will make it easier to overcome those kind of post-2040 challenges. There's obviously going to be a lot of R&D required to develop practical solutions. And we believe if there's an attractive business case for all the players involved along the value chain, then you'll see that the R&D, the requirement, the investment in R&D will happen. But I think to build on what maybe what Glenn was talking about earlier, we see that to start building the infrastructure, the fueling infrastructure at the airports in the early years is kind of critical to work with the airlines to focus on identifying the key routes for hydrogen aircraft, starting with the smaller airports, make the infrastructure investments manageable at those sites, and then start looking to bundle hydrogen demand at the airport itself with the demand for the aircraft. So, looking at ground support equipment, airport buses, etc., and perhaps even public fueling stations as well. So you kind of build up the volume, drive the cost down for having the infrastructure in place at the airport. In terms of delivery, off-site delivery in the early years by truck, liquid hydrogen by truck makes most sense. An average regional airport needing probably about 10 tons a day of hydrogen, so you get about 2.5 trucks a day. That's very manageable. But as the volumes grow, you're going to switch to, if there's pipeline nearby, looking at supplying by pipeline gaseous hydrogen and liquefying it at the site. And as for larger airports and as demand grows, putting on-site production or near-site production through electrolysis with liquefaction, especially looking to take renewable power so that the CO2 footprint is negligible at that point. So a lot of potential, but a lot of challenges. But I think they're manageable, especially learning between now and 2040, and then applying them after 2040 as we scale up. So that's kind of how I'd look at it.
Thank you, David. I mean, listening to the three of you, I think we are at the start of the journey, and step to step to drive that forward. And I think also the immediate action is quite important. Per, you are producing fuel cell systems, fuel cell stacks. What do you see as a main challenge, such as significantly increasing power density of the system, particularly focusing on the next 5 to 10 years? What do you also see as chances would be interesting, and how do you as a manufacturer of stacks and systems address those?
Okay, yes. We already have a fuel cell stack with very high power density, probably the highest power density if we would measure in the same condition. This fuel cell stack we developed for the automotive industry together with the automotive company according to automotive specification. There we also have very high demand on power density, but in this case, the size is more important than weight, since the space in the car is very limited. But of course, there are a relation between size and space. A small fuel cell will be lighter than a big one. But the aviation requirements are very special and also tougher. The operation conditions are completely different than on land-based operations. So there are a lot of challenges with that. So we need to increase the power density, of course, but not only the efficiency. We also need to increase the efficiency and durability, and there we need to find the best solution, because if we increase the efficiency, we will not only save cost and fuel, we will save weight because we have to carry less fuel. So the total weight gain could be bigger by increasing efficiency also. And we, as I said before, we have made an internal study to analyze what is needed to achieve this target for aviation. And we also identified technical solution to realize that. And we see that we need to do a lot of work. We need a big development program where we look into all components within the fuel cell stack in the systems to really optimize them for this specific condition and the requirement. But our analysis also showed that we could reach the power density. What you in your study showed was 2 kilowatt per kilogram would be achievable, and we think that we can go even further than that. But to do this, we also need to work very close cooperation with the aviation industry. I mean, it is possible to improve power density. That would be can be of cost of efficiency or cost of durability or on both. So we really need to find the best compromise. What is needed on the fuel cell? What should be the preferred condition here? So we need to find what is best for the target application, and this could be different for different segment within the aviation industry too, which will be the best solution on the fuel cell stack. So we need to do this very close cooperation with the aviation industry, not only to set the requirement to define the best compromise, but also since the fuel cell system is very integrated into the other systems within the aircraft, like the air supply and air management system, the cooling and heat management system, the hydrogen management system. So I think that this development have to be a very close cooperation with fuel cell industry and aviation industry to find the right solutions.
Thank you, Per. Rolf, I think from the report and also from the speakers in the panel, we saw that the research and innovation agenda and also the pressure is, I think, rather high. How can we pull together those research and innovation agendas to take a leading role as Europe in this, I would say, global transition?
Okay, let me start by addressing the relevant research topics. And the first group has been mentioned in this hydrogen-powered aviation study as 4 key areas: LHU, fuel and propulsion components, aircraft systems, I would even modify that to configuration, then infrastructure ramp-up and regulatory framework. And of course, certification rules must be part of this, and this is really not at all easy. However, 2 major topics remain. At first, we need to be completely sure that burning hydrogen in 30,000 feet is a good idea. Water vapor is the strongest climate gas we know, some 5 times stronger than CO2. Much research is needed before we can guarantee climate-neutral hydrogen combustion. And at second, we need a completely new air traffic management based on globally accepted models, looking for climate-optimized trajectories, varying the lateral or vertical position based on actual meteorological conditions, looking at contrails, NOx, and etc. Actually, DLR has a worldwide reputation in both topics, and we would be happy to share this. At the end, all this asks for a global system change, and for this, we need to combine regional, national, European, and international R&I power, which leads to the question I've been asked. So in regional and national terms, national aviation research centers such as DLR or HONORA and others are active in close cooperation with national industry and academia. In a European view, there are quite a few actors, like the European associations such as AREA, ASN, plus ASD, the Joint Undertakings, and maybe others. So the stakeholder representation, ACARI, could provide the overview, but it must be empowered for this, which is not the case today. And finally, apart from ICAO, there's only one global organization to look at the R&I topics in aviation, and this is IFAR, the International Forum on Aviation Research, including NASA, SAGI, JAXA, and others, led by a chair team with DLR as the only permanent member. We should make use of this. So the answer to the question may be a sort of global roundtable initiated by Europe, harmonizing the outcome of the different activities. ACARI may be a candidate for the intelligence, if not the harmonizing part, putting together the research on Horizon Europe in general, and in particular with the joint undertakings, the national groups, and representing Europe and that global scale. And of course, DLR is ready to provide more ideas on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Rolf. I looked into the chat and the incoming questions from the audience, and a number of questions are around industry perspective and its outlook. Maybe to one of you who wants to answer, how does COVID-19 impact the industry, and in particularly, what's the impact on the sustainability transition that we are just talking about? Any one of you wants to take this?
I can if you want.
Yes, Stefan.
In fact, it doesn't affect us, and it affects us a lot. What it does not change is the case for change. Transition, climate transition is a must. So it's existential for this industry, and we cannot I would say, push the horizon in a more distant future. So that's the constraints, and the willingness of the whole industry is there. Now, of course, due to the amazing and the incredible strong impact we faced from the COVID crisis and air traffic being so down, across the industry, resources are depleted, financial resources. And really the challenge and the public support we are seeking is really to be able, in the next few years, to be able to keep the pace of innovation, to stay on track with the financial resources we have. So we already got some very supportive measures in some countries. I would mention France, where we are based, where we had an outstanding effort from the government to support research to aviation climate transition. It's going to help us to keep the pace, and we need such efforts in countries, but also at European levels, and Horizon Europe is going to be key to be able to support the journey.
Stefan, many thanks. Maybe a last question to all of you, and given the time, I would appreciate a very short answer. From your point of view, what would be the key request to policymakers to enable hydrogen-powered aviation in the next 5 to 10 years? Rolf, maybe start with you this time.
Okay, why not? So, I mean, we talked about the timescale, what is realistic, and heard about demonstrators and maybe the first aircraft. And finally, we will probably need 20, 30 years, so it's really 2050 for the Green Deal. That asks for quite some heavy demonstrators on clean sky and then other levels, also on national activities. Actually, but I think it's worth all the effort. The key request would be that we have sufficient budget for aviation and the fuel research in general, and particularly for the planned partnerships. That we have this round table for the topics I mentioned, and we have an increased effort in climate research and air traffic management research for this optimized hydrogen application. So we would advocate for joining forces on national and European scale to combine the research even globally and to install the right groups and the chair teams and get started. So you may know, or some of you may know, that we are on the dawn of preparing a new European vision document on aviation. I would again advocate for this one, that we have a new document, that we have a new group of personalities for setting up the new strategy, including the hydrogen role. Thank you.
Thank you, Rolf. Peer, maybe some brief views from you.
So, yes, I think what is important is that we put up this program to develop the technologies so it fits for the aviation industry. So we need this program, like the Joint Undertaking. We need a target research and innovation program, which is addressing the typical technical challenge specific for the aviation application, which we have a correct scoping where we can address a large number of barriers simultaneously. So I think that's very important. Of course, another very important is that we starting to build up the hydrogen fuel infrastructure, production of green hydrogen for the aviation industry, or for other application, which we see is coming now. So I think there will be a need for accelerate the deployment of green hydrogen production and distribution. And of course, we have also this regulation aspect. We need to have regulations in place which use that you can handle hydrogen in the airplane, in the airport, that we have the certification process, which we need for guiding the developments. We develop technology which can be certified and fulfill the regulations. So they will also have to be in place in an early stage.
Thank you, Peer. David, some brief views. David, you need to unmute, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, I think certainly post-COVID, we see a lot of investment, a lot of encouragement for green hydrogen projects, which is good. I think moving to an airport, I think, as Per mentioned, we need to, policies and regulations in place to allow safe handling and usage of liquid hydrogen for fueling a plane itself. You're introducing a new thing into an airport, so make sure those are all in place to allow the delivery and distribution and, then actually fueling the plane on the ground there, etc. So I think those are some of the key things to make it, move forward, is to make sure we have alignment across the European Union, for instance, on that. But I think there's a lot of momentum behind green hydrogen itself in terms of making sure that's going to be available in the quantities required. That's not going to be a problem. It's more making sure all the policies and regulations in place to allow it, I think.
Thank you. Glenn, your views?
Yeah, maybe two concluding remarks. First one is that aviation is a huge value add to society, but we recognize we need to solve the climate impact. And I think we can see ways to do that. We just need support to do it, whether it's from the people on the panel, whether it's from people in the audience, whether it's from regulators. We will need support to do this, and I encourage you and your companies to help make this happen. The second point is really, it's evident from what we've analyzed, from what we've been discussing today, that we need the scale up of renewable hydrogen, whatever the application, whether it's aircraft, whether it's hydrogen aircraft or power to liquid synthetic fuel application, which has the potential of decarbonizing aviation, maybe up to 50% of the solution compared to our industry set targets. If we look at synthetic fuel plus direct usage of hydrogen, that shows a significant potential of hydrogen, and it needs scaling. It needs renewable energy scaling. Even independent of aviation, we have to push this.
Thank you, Glenn. Stefan, what would be helpful to request from policymakers from your perspective?
I think we are facing, and it's not just hydrogen, it's the whole climate transition from aviation. It's a systemic change we are looking for. So regulation, supply, and technology must be developed in parallel and in strong coordination. And so that's important to do that. And I think we've paved the way with the way we organized the future partnerships in the Horizon Europe through clean aviation, through clean hydrogen, and through CESAR. We can bring those connections to inform the public policies. It's important also to remind that it will be a basket of solutions. And as Glenn said, there will be different energy sources which can leverage hydrogen or biomass, by the way, for various segments of flight. So not focus on a single route because it's not going to make it. And the final word, I'm coming back to technique. Don't forget that any solution we have using hydrogen, but also biomass, is going to be more energy intensive because you have to build to produce green hydrogen, and then you have potentially an impact on the efficiency of the aircraft. So you need absolutely to do also a step change in aircraft efficiency. Otherwise, the energy requirements you will have and in the need for renewable electricity is going to be too high. So look at various sorts of energies, have a systemic approach, and don't forget the basics. If we don't make the aircraft much more efficient, it's not going to, any option is going to fail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I think we are already at the end of our panel slot and evidently could continue with this exciting exchange for hours. I heard much common sense from you that hydrogen can play an important role for decarbonizing aviation, but also its complementary role to other technologies. You gave very concrete examples that there has been much advancements in technology in the recent years. However, technical developments are still required and there's a lot of challenges to master this route going forward. We also observed some diverging views on the implementation and realization timeline. I think that became clear also from our discussion. Hence, there's a lot of uncertainties that need to be addressed, and a comprehensive research and innovation agenda with substantial investment and concrete actions starting in short term is a key enabler. A clear policy framework with reliable long-term guidelines would be helpful to focus future actions and particularly also investment. With this closing, I would like to very much thank you, the panelists, for a lively, open, and from my perspective, controversial discussion with many insights into your organization's perspectives and activities. Stefan, Glenn, David, Per, and Rolf, many thanks. Really appreciated your views. Let's now turn on to the next agenda item, our Q&A session. Since the beginning of today's webinar, many of you have sent us questions using the chat functions. My colleagues have structured those in parallel, and Markus will now lead us through those answering sessions.
Exactly. Hello, everyone. Also from my side, thank you for sending so many questions. Obviously, we will be able to tackle all of them, but we group them into some topics that have been reoccurring, and we can also follow up after the panel and after the event with you. Many of you have also asked whether you can get access to the report and the presentation. Yes, the report is online and can be downloaded now, and you can find a lot of the details there as well. Let's kick it off maybe with kind of questions that relate to the overall industry. We just heard from Stefan the view on how the industry is thinking about this and how airlines are thinking about it. But what about the customer view? Some of you asked, is in the end the customer willing to pay for this? Are there any indications that people want to fly sustainably? And I'll maybe hand that question to Daniel, who's our airline expert.
Sure. Thanks, Markus. I hope you can hear me well. So just recently in 2019, we did quite a large survey with 2,500 respondents from 13 different aviation markets and asked on their preferences around decarbonization of the industry. And what we learned is that, I mean, first of all, passengers are very sensitive about the topic of climate change. Actually, a third of the respondents said that they are likely planning to fly less because of climate impact. 8% actually said they are definitely to fly less because of climate change. And quite interesting is that particularly the younger generation, the age between 25 to 34, has a 2 to 3 times higher preference for environmentally friendly flying compared to the respondents above age 55. So there is definitely a preference of customers to fly sustainably friendly. The willingness to pay was answered by 2% of price premium of 2% for a $1,000 US turnaround trip. Of course, that is in a survey and it needs to prove in the real, let's say, decision during the purchase funnel whether that holds true.
Excellent. And let's maybe then jump to another question around the momentum in hydrogen. So many of you have also asked questions around the costs and how will technology develop. Now, obviously, hydrogen is not not only used in aviation, but there are prospects of using it across many sectors. How are there any synergies? Are there any things that aviation can profit from the development in other sectors? And maybe Martin, you want to answer that one?
Thank you, Markus. I mean, we had this discussion and exchange quite a bit, that particularly in the area of infrastructure build-up, hydrogen, liquid hydrogen, etc. There is a lot of synergies, for example, with the heavy-duty transport sector, and there we see a lot of momentum currently in this area picking up. So this would be one area. Obviously, the other area is the whole upstream and generation of hydrogen along the different pathways. So here, the investment cost and the cost curve, and also obviously the technological requirements are being addressed, and there is definitely significant synergies that one helps the other in a circular economy way.
Yeah, maybe I can add here is that hydrogen will of course not be only used in the transportation for aviation, but also in many other parts. I mean, at the moment we are developing trucks on hydrogen, we have buses on hydrogen. So anyway, there will be a lot of learnings also from there that we can use for the deployment of hydrogen in aviation. Plus also a lot of hydrogen will be used in the industry. And we have, for example, a couple of projects in the steel industry to decarbonize the steel. We can use hydrogen, fertilizer industry. So a lot of hydrogen will be necessary. And so, of course, all that amount of hydrogen that will have to be produced, this will be at big scale. So the cost will come down very fast. In terms of fuel cells, as I said, we have other transportation modes that will use fuel cells. And a lot of things we will learn from there that also we can then use in the aviation. So there's a lot of synergies.
Excellent, thank you, Martin. But there were a number of questions around synthetic fuels and the comparison between using synthetic fuels and hydrogen for aviation. Maybe let me answer to this one. When we talked about synthetic fuels here in this presentation, what we mean is e-fuels. So hydrogen that is then combined with CO2 to make something that is chemically very close to or almost equivalent to jet fuel. The big advantage of the synfuels, some of you have pointed out, is obviously that it's interoperable. We can drop it into the current fuel pool. We can fly airplanes with very little modification or no modification with such a fuel. And we can, if we capture the CO2, if we use CO2 in the production of these synfuels that is taken out of the carbon cycle, then it is in theory net zero. So it means that the CO2 that is emitted when this fuel is burned is included in the fuel when it is produced. The reality is, of course, that as we've discussed, the disadvantage of synfuels are that you have an additional process step in the production. So if you compare using hydrogen directly and synfuels, you have another step in the production chain where you need to combine the hydrogen with CO2 before you can burn it in the turbine. And that means that it is essentially more expensive for the energy content that you deliver to the plane. It is more expensive. The second reason is when you burn synfuels in an engine, you do produce non-CO2 emissions, and these non-CO2 emissions have an impact on the climate. As we've shown in the study, in a number of segments, hydrogen can perform better if it's used directly compared to synfuels. This is not true in all of the segments. So as we showed in the long-range segments, the synfuels compare favorably, but in the shorter ones, hydrogen has an advantage. Then I think maybe around the production of hydrogen, many questions around, did we consider green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and did we also consider the CO2 that is emitted when hydrogen is produced? So first of all, we included the complete production cycle from the energy input all the way to the fueling of the airplane and then the use in the airplane. It is very important to consider how is the fuel that we're burning produced. When we make hydrogen from carbon emitting sources such as natural gas, we have some CO2 that is produced during the production. When we produce it using carbon capture, some of that carbon can be captured and the fuel can be reduced in CO2 content. And if we produce hydrogen from renewable electricity, then we get green hydrogen, which is free of CO2. So the study includes all of this comparison. Maybe Maurits, you want to talk a little bit about the costs of these different paths and how they compare over time?
Yeah, sure. So I think first of all, on the liquid hydrogen production cost, of course, there is sort of three components to that. There is a component of the actual production of the hydrogen, which if we want to do that in a green way, would probably likely go through electrolysis, or as Marcus just said, could go through gas-based reforming and then CCS on top. That's a large component of it. Then there's two other important components. That's liquefaction and distribution. The liquefaction actually can add up to 20-30% extra cost on top, and distribution then, let's say 10% on average. What that will result to, by our estimates, if you just think what can this result to in at scale production, right? By our estimates, by 2040, you have liquid hydrogen at the airplane, so the fueling nozzle, for about twice the cost of kerosene today. Now, if you compare that to synthetic fuels, as Marcus was already referring to, it's a much more energy-intensive process, especially if you want to capture the CO2 from the air, which is the only truly carbon neutral way of doing that. That will be 3 times as energy intensive. And so the syn fuel production could be on average twice as expensive per unit energy to actually get to the airport and the fueling nozzle. So sure, we can use all the same infrastructure, but it has a significantly higher cost of production, which is why I think on top of the climate impact potential, hydrogen has an interesting cost perspective angle.
Excellent. And then one more question. Maurits, do we have enough energy to make all that hydrogen that we need?
Yeah, so I think by some estimates that we looked into now, what we need in terms of hydrogen by 2050, we need to actually expand our production of electricity by 50% on top of what we would project without that hydrogen. Of course, there's many scenarios out there, but there is a ton of renewable energy resources that we're not tapping into yet in geographies that are very interesting to exploit because of their great solar energy exposure or wind energy exposure, or even the combined. So I think overall, our perspective is that this is doable. Of course, it's a tremendous scale up of energy required, but it's an exciting opportunity for many renewable energy players to go into.
Great. And then I would say there are a lot of questions on the aircraft itself. So let's maybe turn to this one. A number of you have asked, what about batteries? Do batteries play a role in the decarbonization of aviation, and where do they play a role? Maybe I'll hand that question to Julian.
Yes. We saw in our analysis that you have to be aware of the segmentation of the commercial aircraft sector, and that batteries, due to their lower energy density, are kind of limited in range for these different segments. So we see them definitely playing a role also in like the commuter aircraft segment and very lower ranges of aircraft. But still in like larger, we mostly see them as a hybrid solution. So either in a hybrid electric as defined today with kerosene combined, but also what we saw in the fuel cell combination and others. So that would be the role of batteries as we see them, unless there is not a huge breakthrough in the energy density of batteries.
Great. And in terms of the technology development, we already talked a lot about energy density, power density of fuel cells. Stefan has pointed out the need to develop liquid fueling systems. Can you say a bit more? Are these the critical components to develop? And to add on a second question, what about safety? How do we ensure that this is all safe?
Yes, and this is also the main point that I would highlight here. So we see that the different components, they either already exist, at least in demonstrator areas and for different applications. But first of all, the performance has to go up. And what you just said, it's very important to get certification. And this means, of course, that safety and redundancy of a system has to be proven. And this will be the first time that in an aircraft setting, such hydrogen components from a liquid hydrogen, so cryogenic cooled system with combustion, etc., is combined and then has to be tested in different air conditions, so different flight conditions, etc. And this is the key point where we still see the major need to also go beyond just component testing and also look into demonstrator testing to test the system.
Excellent, thank you. And then maybe as a last question, we have both the hydrogen and fuel cells joint undertaking and the Clean Sky 2 joint undertaking here. To Bart and Axel, what are the plans to include hydrogen aviation in your future programs? How does this play a role? And maybe we start with Bart.
Yes, so thank you very much. So our vision is that for all in our joint undertaking, we mainly have to focus on developing the components. So the fuel cells, the liquid hydrogen tanks, potentially the turbines, but also the refueling system. So we need to make sure that they are all okay to be used in the aviation industry. And then when they are, and we will have to work very close in relationship, of course, with the aviation industry to understand what their requirements are exactly. In addition, also, we will have to work a lot on regulations. I mean, pre-normative research will be required, and I believe that we will have to do that together with the other joint undertaking, because we need to know exactly what are the requirements and what are the standards that will be necessary. Axel?
Yeah, thanks, Bart. Maybe to just build on that, as most of you, I guess, or at least a huge part of you, have been involved in the recent development of the SRIA, the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda for clean aviation, for the new program under Horizon Europe. You have been part of the definition of the content, and content is geared around three main demonstrator areas. The first one is hybrid electric and full electric architectures. The second one, ultra-efficient gas turbines power architectures. And the third one, and transversely to the first two one, disruptive technologies to enable hydrogen-powered aircraft. So exactly the topic we have been speaking about today has been included into the SRIA, into the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda. More than 1,000 participants from research organizations, from universities, from SMEs, and from bigger industrial companies were involved in building that agenda. So I think it's a very good baseline for building on what has been said today and making it a reality.
Fantastic, great to see the momentum. This concludes our Q&A session. I know there have been many more questions since we had more than 1,200 participants dialed in today. We were not able to answer all of those. You will find a report and also on the website. I hope it answers a lot of the also more detailed technical questions. Also feel free to reach out to us after this session for any additional Q&A. And with that, I hand over to Axel to introduce the next item on the agenda.
Thanks, Markus. Next item on the agenda is Patrick Child, the Deputy Director General Research and Innovation of the European Commission. And I have now the great pleasure to introduce Patrick. Some of you may know Patrick. He has a very long experience within the European institutions in various leadership roles, and he has been in this role as Deputy Director General since 2016. So Patrick will hold the second keynote speech today, and I think he will put aviation and hydrogen technology development into the perspective of Horizon Europe, the new program of European research. So good afternoon, Patrick, and directly over to you then, please.
Well, Axel, hello, and very happy to be with you. And it's a great pleasure for me to be part of this very rich discussion this afternoon on the potential for hydrogen to contribute to the future of decarbonisation in the aviation sector, and more particularly how the future partnerships under our next research and innovation framework program, Horizon Europe, will be able to contribute to that. And it's an honour for me also to be representing our Commissioner, Maria Gabriel, on this occasion, who, as you said, is unfortunately unable to join us today. What struck me listening to the discussion over the course of this afternoon is the optimistic and positive forward-looking flavour of the discussion that we've been having, notwithstanding the huge challenges that we face in the European Union, firstly in meeting global challenges like climate change, but also now compounded with dramatic effect in the aviation sector by the COVID-19 pandemic. I've heard many people very passionately committed to the future of hydrogen in the aviation sector, and very thoughtful but also positive about the future way ahead. So what I'd like to do in speaking to you today is perhaps to talk a little bit about the Commission's general approach, particularly in the sort of post-COVID recovery challenges that we face in the place of research and innovation in that. Before then talking about our work first on clean aviation and then on hydrogen, but also then trying to bring the two together in what for me is a really remarkable example of two of our industrial partnerships working together on a common agenda, which I think is extremely positive. So on the post-COVID recovery, as many of you will have seen, on the 27th of May, the European Commission adopted a very significant package of proposals in order to help the European economy and European industry to find its way out of the present crisis, with in particular a very significant boost in the resources dedicated to research and innovation, which of course are a vital component of Europe's economic future. Our proposals rest on two main blocks. Firstly, a recovery instrument under the title of Next Generation EU, with something like 750 billion euros in fresh financing from the financial markets, and this on top of a reinforced long-term EU budget, where the Commission had already proposed something over €1 trillion for the 2021 to 2027 period. Across the whole EU budget, our intention is to spend at least 25% of the resources on tackling the climate crisis. And we think that the additional funding that this package would bring of 13.5 billion euros for Horizon Europe in the first few years of the financial cycle will help Europe shift towards a clean, circular, competitive and climate neutral economy in line with our objectives in the European Green Deal. The package also includes a recovery and resilience facility to provide large-scale financial support, mostly in the form of grants, to reforms and investment made by member states, including in areas like research and innovation at a national level, health and education. As you know, the recovery package, including the future budget, is now being discussed among member states. There was a meeting of Europe's leaders in the European Council at the end of last week, and the European Parliament is also heavily involved in the discussion. Things are not straightforward. It is a difficult time for the European Union, but we are optimistic that there is a determination among Europe's leaders to come to a rapid agreement on the EU budget. And we are very hopeful that with the strong political support that we've heard, that there will be a big increase in Horizon Europe by comparison to what we've had in Horizon 2020. And this, I think, sets the scene for some exciting opportunities under Horizon Europe. We hope this will be a more impact-driven program with a strong focus on bringing European value added, but also more effective and efficient implementation. Horizon Europe is directly tailored to help us tackle some of the major challenges the EU is facing. In particular, we look for a radical new approach to developing and deploying new technologies and innovative solutions for citizens and for the planet. And so I think that to address these concerns and to make our investments achieve more, we have in particular given attention in Horizon Europe to an overhaul in the way that we work through our partnerships with industrial sectors and the research communities in cooperation also with our member states. And this also means that we are keen to see partnerships not only working more efficiently in the past, but also more closely with other relevant research and innovation initiatives, including other Horizon Europe funded partnerships. And this, I think, is reflected in the discussions that we've heard earlier in today's program that are going on in each of the different sectors covered by our partnerships through the development of a strategic research and innovation agendas. And that perhaps brings me on to the subject of the very, very interesting report that we've seen today, and that is the potential for hydrogen-powered aviation to contribute to our decarbonisation objectives. And for me, this is a really, really good example of how collaboration between different partnership initiatives can come together and produce a really solid shared agenda, taking in the inputs from both the aviation sector, but also the very impressive track record that we have here in the European Union on developing and deploying hydrogen technologies, particularly in areas related to mobility. And so I think that the study will also be a very important contribution to the work that Stefan and other colleagues have been doing recently with us on the future strategic agenda for the Clean Aviation Partnership, in particular as it focuses on disruptive technologies along with accelerated deployment of sustainable aviation fuels and other operational improvements, for example, in areas like air traffic management. And so I think that with this report, both the Clean Hydrogen and the Clean Aviation Partnerships will be well equipped to acknowledge the logic for their future collaboration. I think that the strategic research and innovation agenda for the Clean Aviation Partnership, as I've said, focusing in particular on disruptive technologies for a hybrid electric regional aircraft, for ultra efficient short and medium range aircrafts, and also for, in the medium term, enabling hydrogen powered aircraft, will be able to draw very heavily on the work that this study puts forward. Because I think we all know that transforming the current entirely fossil fuel based system to a future aviation with multiple energy carriers is a massive systemic challenge. Low and zero emission technologies are projected to make dramatic gains in fuel efficiency by 2050 by comparison with today's fleet. And we hope that the partnership will enable aircraft, engines and systems to use the full potential of low or zero carbon fuels, including disruptive innovations such as hydrogen. And therefore we see hydrogen as a really central option in terms of the future landscape of alternative sustainable aviation fuel. And we think that the deployment of sustainable aviation fuels can also benefit from synergies with hydrogen technologies under development in other transport modes. We recognize, and I think it's been mentioned today, that there will be a need, of course, for a regulatory framework and regulation that is fit for purpose, for example, to permit hydrogen propulsion in aviation. And we also need to work together with fuel companies, airports, manufacturers and airlines in order to ensure that the necessary infrastructure development and aircraft rollout happen together. More generally, I'd like to say a few words about our future strategy on hydrogen that the Commissioner mentioned in her remarks earlier this afternoon. I mean, as I guess everyone listening to this event is aware, hydrogen has never been so high on our political agenda, and the policy context is moving extremely quickly. We see hydrogen as a very important vector in the achievement of the European Green Deal's goal of affordable, clean and prosperous carbon neutral economy by 2050. We've seen a number of initiatives by some of our member states. The very exciting announcements last week by the French government on its plans for a green hydrogen aircraft by 2035, as well as Germany's new hydrogen strategy, earmarking funds also for hybrid electric aviation. So we fit, I think, into a broad trend of hydrogen in aviation, which is well supported across our member states. And particularly because of the specific role hydrogen can play as an enabler to carry and store energy, it provides unique pathways to decarbonize energy in effective industries and different transport modes. Hydrogen will also, we believe, play a very important role in the European Economic Recovery Plan. And in that context, a number of upcoming initiatives include the new industrial strategy that has proposed the launch of an industrial clean hydrogen alliance. I know that many people in this call are heavily involved in the preparation of the future Clean Hydrogen Alliance, and we're looking forward to working with you on developing an investment and deployment that includes a strong research and innovation dimension. We're also in the final stages of preparing proposals for a new European strategy on hydrogen to be launched, we hope, in the beginning of July, covering all dimensions of hydrogen's potential to achieve our policy goals, including and in particular in areas like energy, climate, industry and environmental policies. We also intend to address the investment challenge as well as the very significant international dimension. And this fits together with a range of other initiatives like the Commission communication that we're working on, energy sector integration, and also in the area of state aids, the launch of potential important projects of common European interest related to hydrogen. Bringing all of this together, our aim is to put Europe in the strongest possible position to achieve a significant level of market penetration for clean hydrogen and successful fuel cell technologies over the next decades. And that's really the backdrop also for the work that we've been doing on preparing for the future Clean Hydrogen Partnership under Horizon Europe. It is one of the sort of flagship institutionalized partnerships that we are preparing alongside the Clean Aviation Partnership that I've already mentioned. And we are working with the stakeholder communities in order to maximize synergies between the future Clean Hydrogen Partnership and other important dimensions of the future Horizon Europe program. There will, of course, be some progress, evolution, we hope, focus on the content of the future Clean Hydrogen Partnership by comparison with the current fuel cells joint undertaking. We hope that we will be able to expand its work program to address hydrogen as a medium for renewable energy storage, focus also on the important challenges of the production of hydrogen at an affordable and economically viable cost, but also as an energy carrier in the sector, and looking where we can at important industrial scale applications of hydrogen, for example, in areas like the steel sector, as well as the focus of today's discussion on new transport applications. So we're hoping that this partnership will help us to improve through research and innovation, the energy efficiency, scalability, reliability and quality of clean hydrogen applications in the EU at a viable cost. So in conclusion, colleagues, I'm really happy to be part of this discussion today. As I say, very struck by the optimistic but also well-developed thinking about the potential of hydrogen technologies to help with the decarbonisation of the aviation sector. And for me, a really powerful example of the sort of collaboration and cross-fertilization of ideas, concepts that we believe will be vitally necessary if we are to exploit the full potential of Horizon Europe to support our work, not only in taking forward our research and innovation agendas, but also in promoting economic recovery and competitiveness and success in the European economy. So thank you all very much for your attention. And over back to you, Axel. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patrick, for highlighting the ambition of the European Commission on one hand in the COVID-19 recovery, but on the other hand as well in the Horizon Europe context. And I noted that you spoke about the focus on impact, and as you could see today, we have spoken mainly about impact today. And secondly, what I also noted very much is your plea for the synergies and the connection between the different elements and tools and processes. And I think we have also demonstrated today here that between aviation and hydrogen, there is a very close connection already, and we have others in place, but there are more to come. I call that innovation architecture, and I think it's a very strong asset we have to build, and even more to build in the context of Horizon Europe than we did that in the past. So thanks a lot for your contribution today and your insights, and we count on your support for the coming weeks and months and years in this context. Thank you. So we all agreed today that our ultimate goal is to achieve climate neutral aviation by 2050. We have also heard that turning this ambition into reality requires the seamless integration of a range of important new technological advancements, one of which is hydrogen-powered aircraft. And this comes hand in hand with future aviation priorities, such as, for example, engine architectures, hybrid propulsion, more electric aircraft, ultra-efficient configurations, and not to forget lighter airframes. I'm very confident that this mix of various game-changing technologies will finally make us reaching our final destination. But, and I think that's a point to highlight at the end, it's not sufficient to only develop all of those technology bricks. It is of utmost importance that those bricks are tested within an integrated demonstrator or demonstrators in order to ensure that these technologies are, the interdependencies of those technologies are proper, organized and optimized. In this context, as I said just to Patrick before, the support of the European Commission is absolutely vital in order to achieve those super ambitious targets. And we count on the Commission to support us in this way forward. And I think what was also very apparent, we have to start now in order to meet the timeframes mentioned, so that by 2050, climate neutral aviation becomes the reality. With this call for action, I would like to hand over back to my colleague Bart. Bart, please.
Thank you so much, Axel. Yes, I can only repeat something very important, what you mentioned as well, is the message that heavy R&I investments will be necessary to build really this demonstrator by 2028. And again, I want to emphasize, and also as we all heard today in the webinar, the hydrogen sector, which is represented mainly by Hydrogen Europe, the industry, but also Hydrogen Europe Research, the research community, is really ready to take off and looks really forward to cooperate with you and the whole aviation industry. I want to thank everybody who actually helped to realize this study. Of course, the whole team of McKinsey, thank you very much. You did a fantastic job. Well done. And also all the companies, of course, who contributed to this report, because there was a lot of contribution, a lot of discussions, and I think it went all very fine. And it's an amazing report if you will read it. But also I would like to thank in particularly our staff, the staff from Clean Sky, Ron, the head of unit, and also Jean-Francois and Maria, great job. But also inside the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking with Mirella Antanasio, my head of unit of operation and communications, Enrique, the project officer, and my entire communication team. Thank you very much to set up this webinar and following the study in depth. I believe indeed this was a very successful cooperation of two joint undertakings, Team Clean Sky and the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. And I'm sure that this is just the start. Much more will come, I'm sure about that. Finally, thanks to all of you attending, 1,200 people today. And do not forget to download. I saw that you got already the links in the chat box, but also you can just surf to one of our websites of Clean Sky or Fuel Cells and Hydrogen and download it. So by this, I would like to close the webinar, and thanks and goodbye.